What's going on, everybody? My name is Curci, and I just played Life is Strange 2. Now I want to talk about it. So Life is Strange 2 is the fourth installment into the Life is Strange series. Because you got Life is Strange 1, then you had Life is Strange Before the Storm, which was a prequel before Life is Strange 1. Then you had The Adventures of Captain Spirit, which is sort of kind of a concurrent story to Life is Strange 2. Just a short little tale about a specific character before we go into Life is Strange 2, which, to be honest, I don't think was that necessary. But if you don't know what Life is Strange, the series is, it is a story-driven experience. It is point and click. It's all about having conversations with characters, forming connections with those characters while you carry out your story and make choices. And there's not a whole lot of gameplay beyond that. But I wanted to play this game because I was in the mood for playing something that was a little bit more story-driven, because I do plan on playing Sekiro next. But before I jump into a From Software game, I wanted to do something just a little bit more relaxing, just a little bit less involved. And I like the Life is Strange series, so I was like, yeah, Life is Strange 2 is right there and available, so let's just play it. Now, before we get into this video, I would love it if you guys could like this video. It helps out tremendously. Also, consider subscribing to the channel. Hit the bell icon so you can be notified of all new video uploads. I upload a new video every Friday. Now let's talk about Life is Strange 2. So Life is Strange 2 is all about these two brothers, the Diaz brothers of Sean and Daniel. The playable character is Sean, so that's your character, and that's the person who's making a lot of the decisions. Then you have your younger 9-year-old brother, Daniel, who's a little bit more special than just being a 9-year-old kid. So the game starts off just like you would think a Life is Strange game would start off. You're just a kid who's in school. He has a crush on a girl. He's got his best friend, and he's worrying about going to this party. Your dad's around. Your dad's a pretty cool dude. He's just doing his thing, being a single parent. But then something happens which results in the father being shot by a police officer, which means that Daniel, who has a special ability, just kind of loses it. And then we figure out that life is pretty strange. So the brothers go on the run, and they just kind of decide that we gotta go. We gotta find a place to hide. So we're gonna go back to Mexico, which is where our father came from. And hopefully we can make a new life for ourselves where we will not be pursued by police officers that are coming after us for something that we really didn't do, even though we kind of did do. Of course, I'm not saying that the brothers were at real fault here, but if we're talking about like, yeah, there's a thing that happened and the police are pursuing them for that thing, then technically, yeah, they did do it. It's just there are circumstances that surround it. It's not really their fault. Anyway, I don't want to spoil too much from the story because I think that story is a huge part of this game. And if you spoil the game's story, then you have nothing else to play for. But these kids go on the run, and along their adventures, they have obstacles. They meet enemies, they make friends, they make allies, and you have to make decisions as the older brother, Sean, that will affect your younger brother. What's cool is that there are so many little decisions that you make that will impact your ending. There are actually more than 2 or 3 endings. And the game does come to a point where you have to make a decision, but depending on what you've done building up to that point may result in how that thing will play out. And a lot of that has to do with your younger brother, Daniel. Because your brother has these powers where he can lift things with his mind, he can cause like shock waves, he's got telekinetic powers. Throughout the game, he learns how to master that ability and how to use that power, but you do go on a little bit of a power trip if you are Daniel. So as the older brother, you get an opportunity to mold the kind of person that Daniel becomes. Is he going to be someone who cares about others, doesn't want to hurt people, wants to use his powers wisely? Or is he going to be a person that's like, no, I'm the one that has this power. All of you should listen to me. What I say goes. And it's just little things throughout the series that will ultimately shape Daniel into the kind of person that he becomes, which will affect the ending. Now, speaking of Daniel's powers are, like I said, they are telekinetic abilities, but Daniel is the one that has them. Sean does not have abilities. The game hints throughout that Sean may have abilities because he's related to Daniel, and if Daniel has some, then Sean must have some. So there was like that little hint of like, yeah, Sean doesn't have it immediately, but maybe in later episodes or even the last episode, Sean will reveal that he actually has a power, but that doesn't happen. Daniel is the only one that has power. And so that's kind of the theme for Life is Strange, is that you have these story elements about these characters and forming connections with those characters, but there are superpowers in this universe, because we learned that with Life is Strange 1, where the playable character Max has the ability to control time. She can rewind time to a point, or she can visit old memories just by looking at photos. And then you just have Daniel, who has these telekinetic powers. But what was interesting about the first Life is Strange is that while playing as Max with the rewind power ability, that had an effect on the dialogue. You would make a decision, you wouldn't like the outcome, so you would rewind time, and then you would do something else, and then you would determine on which choice you liked better, and then you would rewind time and make that choice. The game allowed you to just see every option before making them, without seeing the long-term effect of it, because Max could only go back so far. But the important thing is that Max's time travel ability affected how the game played because it had an impact on how the dialogue worked. So it had an interesting twist on the style of game, whereas Daniel doesn't really have that, because not only does Sean not have the power, so it's not like you could choose to use your power in the middle of a conversation, but Daniel is the one with the power, so you can't always control what Daniel does with his power, but it also doesn't have any impact on the dialogue at all. And I think that's where a lot of the magic that Life is Strange 1 had gets lost with Life is Strange 2. Because there are a lot of times in Life is Strange 2 where I made a decision and it was like, ooh, that was the wrong decision and I wish I had chosen something else, but I don't have a magical power that I can use to make another decision or impact what the decision did. I just think it became a little bit more basic or a little bit more bare bones than the uniqueness of the first Life is Strange. So because this game doesn't have an ability that affects how dialogue carries out like the way the first Life is Strange does, this game really only has the conversations and the connections that you have with the characters, which is good. There are tons of characters that you're going to be like, this is an awesome character and I feel a real connection with this character. So when things happen, you feel the emotional impact. So that's effective. But very often this game will introduce a great character that you hope will have a bigger impact on the story going forward, but it doesn't. Because what often happens is that the brothers are always going forward. They're always making their way toward Mexico, which means they're getting further away from characters that they have met in the past, which means that aside from the one episode that that character was featured in, there's a good chance that you will not see a returning character later. There are a few exceptions, but I was just a little disappointed because I was like, man, I really wish that I could run into Brody again, or I really wish that there was a way that we could have an interaction with Lila again, because those are the two characters that I was the most upset about with not having future stuff with. Like, I really wanted more opportunity to mold the relationship between Sean and Lila, because I felt that there was a connection from go. She's in the first episode and you interact with her a lot, and that's her episode, but then later there's like a throwaway phone conversation. It's not really throwaway, it's actually a pretty good conversation, but I chose not to do it. I only found out about it because I did it later, because I was like, I don't want to get tracked because we're running from the cops, which means I missed out on a really great opportunity, which would have been great if I had a rewind power, because then I would have had that phone conversation and been like, okay, I had that phone conversation and I actually like the way that that carried out, so I'm just going to leave it. Or I'm going to be like, I had the phone conversation, that's just for me. Now I'm going to rewind time. So now, even though we didn't have the conversation, we are just going to leave it at that, and I don't want the cops to track me. Or even with Brody, where you have a great bromance with this character, and then later it's like, oh, if you want to contact me, visit me on my blog. So there's a couple of opportunities where you can look at Brody's blog, but you don't interact with him. You don't call him, you don't write to him, you don't email him or anything. There's never another interaction with Brody, which is a shame because Brody's character explains that he travels a lot. So I was hoping like, oh, this is going to be a character that we meet a little bit later down the line. No, it ain't. So this game is all about forming connections with characters. You just form a connection with them and then you leave. You would hope that a game like this would want to build and build and build and build on these relationships, but you don't get a whole lot of opportunity to do that with this game because you're always leaving and you're always going to a new place. Because if you look at Life is Strange 1, that game takes place in one area, which means you are always interacting with characters that you've interacted with before, and you have another opportunity to build on what has already been built on, which means that in Life is Strange 2, because they're always moving, they don't get that opportunity. You don't run into characters because you're leaving to go somewhere else. Like Lila's not going to just suddenly pop up at the border of Mexico, but that loses the personal connection that you had. So that was another big bummer for me, because it was like, there are so many characters that I had met that I wish I could continue interacting with. Now, where this game hits is the relationship between Sean and Daniel, because like I said earlier, as the big brother Sean, you have an opportunity to mold the character of Daniel, either directly or even indirectly. Decisions you make, he will observe, and it will change the way he perceives the world. Will he be kind and caring or ruthless and vengeful? It reminds me a lot of the connection between Lee and Clementine from the first Walking Dead Telltale game. Because even though you are Lee, you are the guardian of this character, decisions you make, she will observe and will do things as a result of things that she's observed. So immediately you become the father figure where your ultimate goal is to protect this kid that you found that you see as a daughter. And so you kind of get a very similar effect between the relationship with Sean and Daniel. And this was a big plus for the game. Decisions you make affects him. So there are going to be a lot of times where you want to make one decision, but you can't make that decision because that could potentially put Daniel in more danger, or it sets a bad example for Daniel. Like there's one point in the game where because of Daniel's abilities, there is a thing you can do, which will really set you up for the future if you decide to go through with it. But the problem is that if you do decide to go through with it, then that will in turn put Daniel in danger, and that's just not an option. If Daniel were old enough to make the decision as as a more mature thinking person, then maybe that door would be open. But I don't want to make that decision because that's just a stupid thing to ask a kid to do, even a kid with these abilities. Not only that, but I want to set a better example for him, so let's not do that thing that's super risky that would also be exploiting his powers and therefore telling him that doing this thing is an okay thing to do. And I'm being vague because I don't want to spoil too much, but that is the thing that happens. There's an opportunity and you could totally do it, but it really wouldn't be to the benefit of Daniel to do that. So you do end up becoming like this very protective figure to Daniel, which at times makes Daniel resent you because there are things that you know as an adult, I'm going to make this decision because that's the best thing for us, but Daniel wants to do the opposite because he feels like he can. And so there's a lot of that resentfulness or anger where Daniel's like, no, I can do this. Why can't you trust me? So it creates a dynamic between these two characters. And I think that that really worked because it affected me because I was like, I care about Daniel. Daniel's not a bad character. He's sometimes difficult to work with, but he's also a kid. So you'll make a decision that you know is to the benefit of the both of them. But the way he sees it is that you're just being a jerk that's not going to let him do the thing he knows he can do. And every once in a while, you have to concede. You have to look at that and be like, you know what? I'm wrong. You're right. You can do this thing. So I'm going to let you make this decision or whatever, which builds on the relationship. The dynamic between Sean and Daniel was the strongest part of this game. And I think that if that didn't work, this game would have failed. Regardless of the fact that I think Life is Strange kind of lost its uniqueness in terms of having an ability that affects the dialogue, I did really enjoy the story and the journey that these two brothers went on, the people that they met along the way, the relationships that they formed, the obstacles that they had to overcome, because there's a lot of them. And some of it is racism, because the idea of racism is going to come throughout, because Sean and Daniel are of Mexican descent. They are at the receiving end of bigotry. There are going to be times throughout the story where they are going to be discriminated against based on how they look, which is obviously a social commentary on things that are going on today, where people just look at people and assume that because of based on the way they look that they're up to something, which is f***ed up because these kids are just kids trying to survive. You are running away from something, and by running you are making it worse. But still, it's like a little bit of understanding would have gone a long way, but still, it's racism, and racism is always a bad thing. But this does bring up something that I was actually kind of annoyed by, going all the way back to when Daniel was being bullied. You have an option to try and de-escalate the situation, or you have an option to confront the bully. But what ends up happening is that the game makes the decision for you anyway. Diaz brothers were walking away from the situation. If they had just walked away, got into the house, maybe talked about it, the entire events of this game would not have happened. Because if you de-escalate the situation, the Diaz brothers are walking away, and if they get inside the house and then that situation does not happen, then the police officer has no reason to pull over, which means that the father doesn't die, which means that the brothers don't explode. We discover Daniel's powers, and then the game doesn't happen. Even if you choose to walk away, the bully will still say something, and then the game kind of goes on autopilot, which means that Sean then involves himself, which results in a fight, which results in a reason for the police officer to be pulled over, and then everything else happens after that. And that happens a couple of times throughout the game where you'll make one choice, but then the thing happens anyway. And it's this whole idea of illusion of choice, and I think that this game had that in spades, where there are going to be tons of opportunities for you to make one decision or another, and you'll make one decision because you're like, this is the right decision, but then later something else happens which makes the other decision happen anyway. Choosing not to do choice A will affect how Daniel sees that situation, which will ultimately mold him into the person he becomes, but you still need that element to happen that then carries the story forward. Every time it came up, I was like, I'm gonna make this choice, but I know that the other thing's gonna happen anyway. It's sort of like saying that there's a character that says, I want to go golfing, and I want Daniel to come with me because I know that with Daniel's powers, he'll make my golf game incredible. And then you're like, no, I don't want to go golfing, and I don't want Daniel to be exploited that way, so we're just gonna back out. So then you go off and you're doing other things, and while you're away, you come back and you realize that the character took Daniel to golf anyway. You always knew that golfing was going to happen, but it really was a decision on whether or not you went golfing with them. There were so many times where it was predictable. It was like, we're gonna do this thing, and I don't want to do this thing, but Daniel's pushing to do this thing. And then there are so many times where the game just makes the decision for you. I do like the way that the game progressed because more often than not, the outcome that I wanted to happen did happen. And obviously the bad stuff, you never want the bad stuff to happening, but sometimes the bad stuff just happens. But there are going to be times where you're like, Daniel, I don't want to do this thing because we are not supposed to do this thing. But Daniel's like, no, I really want to do this. And then the game doesn't really give you the choice on not play along or to play along. The game will just be like, no, you have to play along. Which then also leans more into this idea that I felt like I was watching more than I was actually playing. It didn't give me every dialogue option. It felt like Sean was talking for for me. And of course, it being a role-playing game where you make a decision and you're like, oh, I think this is the right thing to say, but then the character delivers it in a much different way than you imagined in your head. So it'll be like an option where you say, I don't want to talk about this, because you imagine that the character would just be like, I would prefer not to talk about this. But then the character's like, I don't want to talk about this. And it's like, that was aggressive. I think this game did have a lot going for it narratively. I think that the overall story that it told with the themes that it had and the relationship between the two brothers, that was the strongest element. But the game loses me with its use of ability. I kind of wish that it had played into the dialogue a little bit better, or the options a little bit better, or the choices, because that's what Life is Strange 1 did. Life is Strange 1 allowed you to make a decision, see the outcome, and make a determination on whether or not you wanted to go forward with that. And if you didn't, you could rewind and make the other choice. So losing that element in Life is Strange 2 was disappointing. And I also was very disappointed with the fact that I really didn't have a chance to build on the relationships. You would introduce characters, you would form a connection with that character, but then you wouldn't see that character later, which means that you couldn't build on the relationship. While there are exceptions to that, ultimately, you still had other characters that you were like, I wish I had seen that character again so I could continue to build on this connection. And of course, there is this whole idea of illusion of choice, which this game had maybe one too many times, which annoyed me a little bit, but I still was very happy with the story that I went through. I was very happy with the branching endings because I got my ending and I was happy with my ending, but there were other endings that I looked up later and I was like, oh, this is actually a little bit more varied than I thought it would be. So as far as where would I put this game, difficult. It's not must play. I'm torn between either it's a good game or it's okay, but I think I'm going to put it on it's just okay. Because I think that if you look at Life is Strange 1, and this is the thing with reviewing a game that is in an already existing franchise where you just naturally compare it to something that came before, Life is Strange 1 in terms of gameplay and elements and uniqueness is so much better than Life is Strange 2. You could make the argument as far as which story is better. I think that it just wasn't what I was expecting. Maybe I expected too much from it. While it did have that brotherly relationship sort of reflect the Lee and Clementine relationship where decisions you make will affect the younger brother, and that's ultimately what you want to protect, so you make decisions based on that. I think that helps it, but ultimately I think that the Life is Strange franchise took a step backwards. I just think that its biggest failings were that it didn't have some sort of mechanic similar to the one that was in Life is Strange 1, where it allowed you to see all of the options before making it. And also, I just feel like a game like this, where one of its biggest pulls is the relationship that you have with other characters, the fact that characters didn't make a return after their designated episode was a big disappointment. It was missing too many elements for me to sit here and be like, it's must play, although I probably would never have said that Life is Strange 2 is a must play. I would have put it on it's a good game, but I just think it loses elements. So I just think while it was good, it just wasn't as good as I would have preferred it be, and so therefore it was just okay. I feel like I would recommend Life is Strange 1 to people. While it is not the most compelling gameplay, it is still unique enough and tells a great story and has that personal connection with all of those characters that you could still have a lot of enjoyment while playing Life is Strange 1. There are some elements that Life is Strange 1 has and it does well that Life is Strange 2 doesn't have, and so therefore I have to knock it down a peg. I liked it, I enjoyed it, I loved the story, very emotionally engaging, very compelling, but I just think it loses too much that Life is Strange 1 had, and I think that there are one too many ways in which this game could have been better. So as much as it pains me to say that this game was just okay, it ultimately was just okay. But the important thing is, what did you think? Did you play Life is Strange 2? What did you think about it? What ending did you get? Let me know in the comments below. If you like this video, please give it a like. It helps out tremendously. Also consider subscribing to the channel. Hit the bell icon so you can be notified of all new video uploads. I upload a new video every Friday. Check out some of these other videos over here to the side. Thank you guys so much for watching. I will see you next time.